Terrific. Okay, welcome all. Alice Blank here, Chair of the Environmental Protection Committee for Manhattan Community Board 1. I'm joined, I hope, but I don't see yet, Wendy Chapman eventually, our co-chair, and Diana Sweetie, Director of Planning. So thanks all. Big agenda tonight, a number of things, but I don't think a very long or controversial one, hopefully. So I want to welcome Matthew Dunham, the Director of Natural Resources, Capital Design and Construction from the Department of Parks and Recreation. And Jennifer, and forgive me, I'm going to pronounce your name wrong, Loying, I hope, New York City Department of Transportation, who are going to speak about something that's very critical to our neighborhoods throughout the city, which is the Green Streets program, and which is kind of turned into the Green Street Infrastructure program. They're going to tell us what that is, a little bit about the history of it, and how that is relevant to our community, and in particularly with one of the projects that we've supported for many years, which is the Barnett-Newman Triangle of Green Streets located in Tribeca. Okay, so I think it is Matthew who will be kicking this off. So welcome and thank you.
Great. Thanks, Alice. Thanks so much for having me. So I'm going to share my screen here. Let's see if we can get the presentation to come up. Of course, it's gone black. Okay, can everyone see that? Okay, great. So I am from the Parks Department. Again, my name is Matt Dunham, and I'm in the Forestry, Horticulture, and Natural Resources Division. And that is the corner of parks where we design and construct green streets. And as Alice talked about, green infrastructure. And so I'm just, I didn't have a lot of context for this request, so I thought it would just be helpful to walk through a bit of history and kind of define terms. And then I just made a quick map of the green streets in CB1, so we had that as a reference. So why don't I run that? Green streets are simply portions of Department of Transportation owned right-of-way where sort of surplus roadway has been transitioned to green space. And this is a program that's been running for 30 plus years, collaboration between our agencies. And as you can see here, kind of before and after, where a triangle that was formerly asphalt painted out was transitioned by removing that asphalt, creating curbs and frame, and then adding soil and plants and trees. And it had benefits in terms of greening and reducing urban runoff, stormwater runoff from rain. And it sort of, it reduced the impervious surface. They certainly help with cooling of neighborhoods by reducing the amount of paved area. This is an early one. You can tell from the kind of quality of the images in Manhattan, up at West 116th Street, but they are all over Manhattan and the rest of City. Go. And then over time, this program transitioned or sort of added the aspect of receiving stormwater. So not just reducing the amount of stormwater that the area produced, but actually receiving stormwater. This is an area out at Beach 25th Street in Queens. And you can see in the after image where water that's running down the street, the runoff from the street is funneled right into the garden, and it's a bit of a depression, and there is capacity to receive that stormwater and the opportunity for that stormwater to infiltrate into the ground rather than going into storm sewer or the combined sewer system. And so these stormwater green streets were initially a kind of an exercise in sort of testing the potential of this in New York City. That ultimately resulted in these kind of modular units, the right-of-way bioswale, which you see not so much in Manhattan, but in other parts of New York City, they're going in by the thousands. And it's a kind of proven technology to reduce the amount of stormwater in our sewer system. And so in the foreground here, you can see water rolls in to this bioswale. There's a custom soil mix and a lot of gravel below that, and an emphasis on stormwater capacity. And when it fills up in a really big storm, the extra water flows out and continues on. But the idea is that in most storms, we can capture a lot of water before it moves on. Over time, this program has transitioned mostly out of the Parks Department and is administered by DEP. And so that's kind of where things are today. It's sort of, as I mentioned, going in very large quantities. And we continue to do a little bit of work within sidewalks. This is a recently completed project in Brighton Beach where you can see some PVC pipes in here. We're doing testing of water quantity and water quality with locating these systems in places where we can mitigate impacts on the wetland restoration work that we do in particular. And so water quality is something we're trying to get a handle on and understand. We're also building kind of at the edges of natural areas. This is the Spring Creek wetland and Spring Creek Park, where we're capturing water before it reaches that water body in a rain garden at the edge of a park. And this is also recently completed work, our group. And so just to give you a kind of timeline and the way we as an organization have adapted with the technology. So as I mentioned, Green Streets, they date back to the 80s. We had a unit that we developed to design and build them. It was 2008 when we first started testing stormwater green streets and transitioned into what we call the Green Infrastructure Unit as DEP funding became available to build these in quantities. And then that program was expanded in 2016. And we started focusing more on parkland retrofits, where we're actually on parkland, like that last example I showed, and we're retrofitting parkland to receive stormwater. And just recently, we kind of combined our effort on green infrastructure with our wetland and forest restoration work and created the team that I lead, which is the Natural Resources Capital Design and Construction team. And so all of the people that are working on these issues are working on them together and trying to find overlaps and efficiencies, both in how we work and how the systems work together. We are currently working in CB3 and CB6, developing bioswales and stormwater green streets as a kind of part of the mitigation for the East Side Coastal Resiliency Project. So this is a map where we're using hydrologic analysis to determine which potential street tree locations could also receive stormwater, and looking to build bioswales primarily in CB3 and a little bit in CB6. So that's nearby work we're doing currently in design. And then finally, here's Community Board 1 with, I think we have about 14 existing green streets. At least that's what we have in our data set. Yeah, and so we can come back to this if it's useful. Perhaps we should move on to the DOT presentation, then I'm happy to take questions.
Sorry, I was trying to see the 16 or 14 Green Streets, which I would definitely am going to call you back for, Matt. Thank you so much. That's great. Okay, so Department of Transportation, Jennifer, are you up and ready? Jennifer
Hi,
Long from
I'm
the
here.
DOT.
I'm here.
Welcome.
I'm just
Thank you so much.
gonna give a brief um I'll speak briefly and then also hand it off to my colleague Gavin Barber, who's also joining us. So my name is Jennifer Liang, with DOT Manhattan Borough Commissioner's Office. I just want to mention that many of the green streets that are they're currently owned by DOT and they're mostly maintained by parks. Our role is a little bit limited, but we typically review designs provided to us. We may look for like additional opportunities within like a DOT capital project where we can where we will end up coordinating it with some of our sister agencies, which may include DEP and DDC, as well as parks. And this would just include some of the green infrastructure. DOT pretty much ensures that the designs in the cities right away are ADA compliant and that there's sufficient pedestrian clear space and that they don't impact safety or vehicular movements. I know there was interest in knowing a little more about Barnett Newman Triangle. I know that this goes back to at least prior to even 2018. There was a developer who came to us for 100 Franklin, and they submitted a plaza application. The developer ended up telling us that they needed additional funding for those improvements for that triangle, but then they also needed to do some fundraising. So what we believe happened here was that they never came back to us. So I don't know if they ever, received that funding that they needed. And, since they didn't reach back out to us with a plan of proposal, we didn't, there was nothing on our end that we were able to do. I mean, it is the developer's responsibility to come back to us with a proposal before we can, assist them with the plaza application in itself. So according to what I know from my plaza program folks is that it is on hold indefinitely unless the developer comes back to us or we get another interested partner for that location. I know Gavin's on. If there's anything that he would like to provide input on.
Hi, I'm here. My name is Gavin Barber. I'm the co-director of capital planning here at DOT for roadway reconstruction. And I don't know that I have a great deal to add. Specifically, that was a great presentation from Parks. It was really interesting for me to see as well. We in capital planning sort of interface with parks and on lots of different types of properties, and green streets, obviously because they're in the DOT right of way, are one of the properties, because there's many of them and they are in many locations where we are looking to make improvements either for improving the roadway itself or making improvements for pedestrian or bicycle or motorist activity. We changed the geometry of Green Street triangles. They come in all shapes and sizes, but triangles is sort of the standard shape and size because of where they often are placed where streets come together in awkward ways. So we are often looking to widen them, change them, extend them, improve them, reconstruct them in our capital projects. And we work with parks very closely on that work, coordinate on what they'd like to see, how they'd like to see improvements, what opportunities there are. And they are kind of a standard element in our capital program.
Okay, I assume that's the end of your presentation from DOT. So I'm gonna thank you very much. Nice to meet you, Gavin. So I'm gonna open it up to CB1 committee members and members generally, and then up to the public for any questions that you have about the Green Streets program. Do I have anybody in the committee that wants to know more or has questions or thoughts? Okay. Nobody on the committee. Oh, two hands went up. Okay. Bob Schneck, take it away.
Why don't you lead with Wendy rather than me?
Okay, Bob.
Okay, you're running the show there. Okay, Bob. Wendy, our vice chair, our co-chair. Welcome. Thanks.
Thank you to everybody for the update. That's really great. I just wanted to kind of follow back up with the idea that if the developer just didn't pay, there's no really follow-up from the city or, I guess it's not your job to chase the money down. If the money's not there, then no one moves forward. I'm just trying to figure out in terms of, like Alice, we want more of all of what you're doing. All of this is wonderful. It just really comes down to funding. Is that the answer in all these cases? And it's up to us to figure out how to put the funding in your line item so things get built in our neighborhood. Is that, I guess it's a general question, but Alice, I'm probably not doing this justice. Help me out.
I think your question is extremely, on target. I think the reason we wanted to bring all of you together, and I'm very sorry and disappointed, frankly, that DEP is not represented here, is we need to know, and I'm sure every community needs to know, as to how they can go forward effectively on these green streets. We hear that this is a program, and albeit changed to a green infrastructure program. And then we're told, well, we had one that was very much on the books, and frankly, since 2005, not 2018. And it was in parks, and then it was DOT, and DOT has done a great deal. And I'm talking specifically here as an example at Barnett Newman. And work was done. And then we're told that, well, if the developer doesn't provide money, then it can't happen. So I guess let's ask some specific questions. How are these green streets funded? How much funding is expected to come from the private sector? Let's start there. And I don't know exactly who to address the question to, but I guess everybody that's been presenting.
Well, I obviously can't speak to the specific Barnett Newman example, but there is not a dedicated funding stream for green streets per se. The green streets that I mentioned, the ones associated with Eastside Coastal Resiliency, and the funding there is coming from that project budget as a sort of a community concession. We're finishing up a green street. It's been on the books for a very long time. That's council member funded. So that does still happen, where a council member, targets a specific green street with public funding. But there isn't a dedicated funding stream. It's sort of case by case. And and I think it's probably important to note here that green streets come with an additional challenge of maintenance funding, because it's essentially increasing the maintenance burden. It's like adding more park, and so and we as an agency, our maintenance operations are severely underfunded as it is. So it's very difficult to advocate to add more to the docket without additional funding. And so that kind of dedicated funding for maintenance is a particular challenge for this program. The green infrastructure funds, and I think part of the reason that we build more stormwater green streets these days than regular green streets is that there's a funding stream for that work. DEP needs to meet a consent decree to reduce the amount of stormwater flowing into our sewer system. And so they are funding those projects and they are maintaining those projects. And so that has a lot to do with why we're seeing so many more of those be built. And I guess one more thing to say is that DEP is not focusing those funds in Manhattan because, as I understand it, as it's been communicated to me, it's much harder to find locations where these systems can work due to all the underground utilities and contamination and that sort of intensely built nature of Manhattan. And so DEP has been trying to find locations where they can cost effectively meet this order they're under. And as I understand it, Manhattan has been deemed, much too difficult to get there. And so you see a lot of those funds focused on the boroughs, primarily Queens and Brooklyn. So that's my understanding of the financial framework of these programs.
That's really helpful, Matt. Can you just, sorry to jump in here, Wendy, but just on the same line, can you make clear, and this has certainly not been clear to me, the distinction between a green street and a stormwater green street? So in applying for that, what is it that you would have to define as different?
So as a stormwater green street needs to be able to receive water. It needs to be in a place where water is flowing towards it. And it also needs to have soil conditions below ground that can receive and hold that water or allow it to sink into the ground. So that map that I showed where we're working in CB3 and trying to find locations, we're looking at where is the water flowing. And then the next step is that we have to go out with a soil boring rig, this giant machine, and drill into the ground and determine whether we can put stormwater there. And along with that, we do a lot of analysis of, where are the utilities, what are the other constraints here? Essentially, can we put water here? And so there are some.
In a cistern, or what do you mean put water there? Is it just spills absorb it, or is it a cistern? What are you?
Typically, in most cases, we go down about 4 feet and we dig a big trench, put 2 feet of gravel in it on top of that 2 feet of soil, and we plant, above the gravel. And it's the gaps between, the gaps in between the pieces of gravel, and actually the soil mix is a special mix with more holding capacity. But it's like a giant French drain, if you're familiar. It's like a big place where water can go. And so, but the soils need to be able to receive, the water's going to go in and make its way down into the soil, and it needs to be able to receive it. So you can't have high groundwater, or bedrock, or a pipe, or serious contamination, hazardous contamination. So we have to make sure none of those conditions exist in order to do that, to put it there.
Yeah, rare spot. So I just have one follow-up that's kind of a crazy idea, and maybe this is more Department of Transportation versus Parks, and I showed Alice very recently, but I recently went by a very creative new restaurant. I don't know what we call these sheds that are sitting, that we're all enjoying, the outdoor seating. And one of them had created their own collection for the water that went on their roof, and then would go into a holding, tank that I think they use later on to water their plants. Is that something that, that's a green absorbing water capture, and there are tons of restaurants out there now, and that would definitely stop a lot of water from going into our sewer systems. Is that something that you could advocate for? Because I think right now these new restaurant sheds, or whatever we're calling them, they're on, public streets, but they're helping every park, in terms of that it's not flowing towards the tree pits in the sidewalk, for example, or the, the parks that are nearby. Is that, I'm not sure how, I know everything goes into whose bucket it is, but is that something that you could somebody on here could weigh in on, because I think that's a really nice idea.
Yeah, and just if you could talk a little bit about, I don't know if it still exists, the rain barrel giveaway program, Matt.
So that's I really, I can understand how frustrating it is to hear this, but that is a DEP program. You know, and I don't know its status. It's something I can follow up on for you. I can try to get that information and share it back with group. But that seems to me like a really terrific and sort of easier, you know, low-hanging fruit kind of thing to add rain barrels and to, you know, encourage restaurants to add these rain barrels wherever they're doing the sheds. And it would certainly take stormwater out of the catchment area of the street, you know, because as you point out, these are built in the street or sometimes over the sidewalk, all flowing to the street, which will keep water out of the sewer system.
And I know that's not your job, but can you like send a, hey, good idea, can we collaborate? Or is that not done between agencies?
Well, it's just, I don't have a role to play.
Right. And I've heard that you don't even have to talk anymore. It's just always the problem. Okay. Talk to you later. Thank you.
Well, thanks. A bunch of more hands have come up. So now Bob Schneck. Thanks, Wendy.
Okay. Thank you so much. I think this is really a terrific program, and I'm really interested in it very much. I'm interested in both the flow of stormwater and capturing it. So I was wondering, it just in terms of the serious applications of this. Are you at all, is your department at all involved with the East River Park and the kind of stormwater and water control aspects of that, or with Wagner Park, or even with our small Elizabeth Berger Park? Do you even think about those, or do we have engineers in the city that think about those when they're being built and designed?
So I'm not familiar. They're not within my purview. So as I mentioned, I'm in the Forestry, Horticulture, and Natural Resources Division, which is a little bit. I'm not directly in the Capital Division, which is working on these projects. We work on you know, restoration projects, street tree planting, green infrastructure, these kind of a niche, if you will, areas of park development. So as so I don't, I don't have information about the specific parks. I sort of understand how things work after I'm relatively new with parks. It's only been a couple of years, but I know that with every park development, there is a hydrologic analysis, what's happening with water on the site, and if the development requires adjustments to connections to the sewer system, there's an analysis of its impact beyond the site. And so these analyses are being done. I will say things are changing really quickly. I mean, as we all saw with Ida, you know, all the modeling that we've been basing this work on did not anticipate the pace at which rain fell in that storm. And so there's a real sort of, I don't know if it's hand wringing, that's probably not the right word, but we're all thinking again about the size of the elements we build and what we need to do to anticipate even bigger storms. And there's a question of, you know, adjusting the models. I don't know how that will relate to these specific projects you're talking about, where they are in their design.
So I'm concerned because what I've been watching over the years is a critical problem between sewage and stormwater flow. and we just have a very old system that really doesn't take care of that. And so I was thinking about what your solution. I went, wow, that's a really terrific, a small if terrific, terrific solution. And so to apply that kind of thinking everywhere is a good thing. And so so I see that you're just working on a very small scale, and you're not the place to look for big scale. But do you follow this in terms of whether or not there's funding legislation that people are working on for this, and that we can, you know, kind of fall in behind you and this idea to develop it?
So we are working small scale, but if I can include DEP in the we, you know, with a lot of repetition in order to get at this problem. So we've got these little units that we work on, but if we do, you know, 1,000 in the neighborhood, we can have a real impact. And so it's just kind of a different way of thinking about how we get at the problem. So that's one thing that struck me while you were talking, but I'm not sure. I may have lost your question in the end.
My idea is, my question is, how do we scale up your idea so that we get kind of bigger results and actually start to address the large scale stormwater problem that the city has?
Well, I mean, I guess, yeah. So I think that is happening. As I mentioned, you know, there are 10,000 of these right-of-way bioswales being installed. I think the number might even be higher. And then within Parkland, we're taking basketball courts and, you know, tearing them up and putting infrastructure underneath them, giant rain capturing devices, and then repaving the basketball court. So it is being scaled up primarily by DEP because they hold the funds to do this. And then there's a new thing that's happening going into effect called the Unified Stormwater Rule, and it is requiring that, yeah, and that's worth looking into if this is an area of real interest of yours. It's an important change. Any disturbance over 20,000 square feet will require the landowner, including, you know, public landowners like parks, to have a plan to handle the stormwater. And so it will mean it is a kind of scaling up in a sense, you know, requiring quite a bit more stormwater management in all of the development across the city. So that's the good. And then, as I was mentioning earlier, as the threat changes, we need to change our strategies. And I think, you know, we're always, you know, unfortunately, a few steps behind the pace of climate change as it, you know, gets the challenge gets harder. And so we're working to catch up as always, but I think we're going to need more and different solutions to solve the kind of catastrophic flash flooding that we hadn't been planning for.
Thanks,
so I don't.
Oh,
Yeah.
Just to say, Bob, let me just interrupt, excuse me. We are looking at the Unified Stormwater Rule on our agenda tonight, just briefly.
Oh, great.
And DEP will be coming hopefully in November, they promised, to discuss it more. It is legislation that was passed by council, if I'm not mistaken, last year. So just to say, Bob, we are on that a little later in the program. So I'm going to move on unless there's another.
Could I just ask him one other tiny question?
Okay.
I just want to find out if there's any work going on with permeable streets or permeable pavements or anything like that.
Yes, we are working on permeable asphalt within Parkland. DEP is working on permeable concrete within the DOT right-of-way. that's a program that they've piloted, but my understanding is that they're rolling out in a bigger way. I think first in Brooklyn. I'm not sure if it's in Brooklyn or Queens, but so there is quite a bit of work going on. And then we have small areas of permeable pavers, but it's primarily these larger permeable concrete in the street and permeable asphalt within Parkland where we'll see some real scale of installation. So.
Thanks
Thank
very
you.
much, Matt. I did see two hands, Betty and Gerald, but I see them down. So I'm assuming there are not further questions from the committee, unless Wendy, do you have another question? Your hand is still up. Otherwise, I'm going to move on to
About that.
no problem. So
Alice,
anybody?
can I just say thank you, Bob, for asking that question about permeable paving. That's why my hand's down. And Matthew, thank you for the wonderful presentation.
Thanks, Gerald. Okay, so I see we're going to open this up to the public. If the committee or community board members have a later question, feel free. Esther Regelson.
Yeah, yes, can you hear me?
Yes,
Hello?
welcome. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Matthew, I'm not sure exactly what your organization does. I don't want to take up a lot of time, but you did mention Wetlands Restoration, and I wonder if you guys are working on that, because I'm very concerned about wetlands along the southern part of the Hudson. We see ducklings drowning in there. They have no place to get out of the water, and it would be good for the environment. And I wonder if you have any work going on about that.
Yes, we are doing wetland restoration wherever we, as parks, wherever we have wetlands in parks. We're also building new wetlands, primarily as mitigation, where work is being done along the waterfront. But we're building, constructing wetland. We're doing some work on the Harlem River. We're doing, we have probably 10 wetland restoration projects going on across the city right now. We don't have any work that I'm aware of, near Community Board 1. It's obviously a very difficult place to do wetland restoration. But it is definitely a central piece of the work we do within the natural resources group at Parks.
Thank you. If there's any opportunity to discuss that or work on that in the future, I would very much be happy to hear it and would very much like to be involved or in touch to get something like that going. Thanks.
We absolutely. A place to start, we just released the Wetlands Management Framework last summer, which is a document that talks about the program for wetland management within parks and the priorities that we've set out for restoration as soon as we can get funded to do so. And so it's a really good blueprint that would help you, sort of situate yourself in the work we're doing.
Great, thanks.
Wetland Management Framework, and it was well publicized. I think it came out in July. So, and actually, it led to some funding by the mayor's office for a few projects post Ida. So we're actually looking at getting started on some of that work very soon.
Excellent, thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Could you now, I got a couple of questions, if I may. Could you pull up the slide with the 14 locations, and maybe if we could just review those, given this is our community board's concern, interest. And I don't know if there's any way to enlarge it, probably not, obviously, but very difficult to see.
Let me try.
Do you have, well, I assume you do. I couldn't quite pull up a definitive list of these green streets, but do you have a list of these 14 properties that you could share? Maybe not right now, obviously, with
Absolutely, yeah.
us. Yeah, that would be great. And additionally, could you just identify if there are, in addition to green streets, oh, that's great, also the stormwater green streets, or there are none in Community Board 1? I think that's a little bit unclear, or maybe it's clear, but I wish it weren't the case.
I don't believe that there are any that are stormwater green streets. I can confirm that. So this is keyed to a list that I can absolutely share. And we sort of categorize by type, and I'll be able to confirm that information. But that I didn't see any.
It looks, I can't quite make it out, but it looks like Barnett Newman is on your list here, or on your map rather. Excuse me.
So I have to admit, I don't know where Barnett Newman
Well,
is.
we're gonna help you out, because I know Diana has a slide here, so just so that we really want to focus on this, and we think it's a really great project that we've been pushing for, that the Manhattan Borough President and our council member have asked to have completed, reached out to the developer that Jennifer was referring to, but we
Yeah.
kind of have to move forward. And given what's happened in the last few years, I think the critical urgency of it is on us. So we kind of like to move forward with that project, and all others that we could in terms of the greening of these road beds and such. I don't know if Diana's got that yet, but anyway, we'd love to work with you and DOT to figure out what a next step would be. Could you perhaps give us a sense of that? And I guess specifically, could you, in addition to listing of the green streets, which ones would be eligible for stormwater green streets program, how we would identify those, what kind of work needs to be done to know whether or not, for example, the Barnett Newman could in fact be a stormwater green streets, and then tap into the funding that you talked about that's provided by DEP?
Yeah. So to that last question, as I mentioned, there's quite a lot you need to do to determine if a site will work, including getting out with a soil boring rig. So there are upfront costs, and there's work we can do to analyze the site, and kind of we call it desktop analysis, and so we can learn quite a bit from that. But ultimately, there is a cost to go out and drill and look and see what's underground. It is a hurdle we have to get over to actually access the construction funds. Now, if you have a potential source of funding for the Green Street, it might be a way to, we could perhaps use some of that money to do the testing. And then the additional costs for the deeper excavation and all the stormwater pieces, perhaps DEP would cover that. They often do these kind of cost sharing efforts where the green infrastructure aspect is paid for by their pot of money, and the amenities are paid for by whatever source you had identified for this triangle.
Well, what if we began with just the green infrastructure aspect of this? And so we put up, just for everyone to know, you're looking, this is in Tribeca at across from 100 Franklin Street. You're looking, you've got where we're 6th Avenue and Church are sort of forming this triangle. I guess one question for DOT and Jennifer is, where is this project at? We see these lines and large boulders. What's the next step here, or is this it? And the illustration to the right is, of course, the plaza that was promised to us by the developer across the street, or by whomever, whatever combination of people involved in this, and that's hoped for. And of course, it looks quite green and reasonable and attractive. So anyway, we're looking south and north. So if I can maybe just ask DOT to update us on this. This is a few years ago, before 100 Franklin, which you see being constructed. The building at the north there is the Roxy Hotel, formerly the Tribeca Grand. So maybe DOT, are you still on the line?
I'm still here.
Yeah,
I'm
oh,
still here.
great. So if you could tell us what's going on there, if anything, and what would be a next step that we could put.
So I would say that right now that's just an extension. So what happens with a lot of extensions that we put out there is that it'll eventually get built out. In terms of anything further, I don't know if there's any updates on that, but I can definitely get back to you.
Yeah, could you just tell me what you mean by an extension and a build out and what these boulders are?
The boulder, the granite block that's right there, it's to protect pedestrians or protect the cars when they're turning.
And what's the build out?
The build out where you see right now, that's temporary material.
I'm not sure I know what you mean, but you're talking
Right
about.
now, what you see there with the boulder and then the delineator and then the brownish truffle paint, that's a temporary improvement that we created there. So eventually that would be built out with concrete.
With concrete.
Yes.
But in keeping with this desire to make the city more resilient and greener, and in keeping with the very program that this DOT is partnered with DCP or DPR and DEP, what would be a more, environmentally conscientious way to go forward rather than just concrete? Or is this the idea this would be permeable concrete and we would never see any kind of trees or greening that you see in the lower right-hand corner? I mean, so DOT would come in and pour concrete down here, or not sure I understand.
That would be the future part of that piece, unless there's something else that I'm not aware of. But then let me go back to my folks and look into it. Let me see if there's other something else that they'll be doing there.
Okay, if you could get back to us on that, because that was a little bit of the purpose of this meeting, was to kind of start getting specific about the green streets in our neighborhood. So that would be a great follow-up, and I really appreciate it. I won't belabor it for now, but we will like to come back to this and definitely pursue it. It'll help us to understand, and for the public to understand, how these things get made and how we can have more of them throughout the city. I guess lastly, I just was surprised when I learned from Umberto Galarzar from the Department of Environmental Protection's Community Affairs, who stated that the DEP Green Infrastructure Program does not have a contract for Manhattan, and I'm quoting him, for Manhattan to install green infrastructure in Manhattan. Our green infrastructure program is focused on the other boroughs. So is there a reason that, I know this is a question I would rather pose to them, but why is that the case? Why isn't there a contract for Manhattan? Is that a matter of need, or I understand there's some discussion of it needing to be near CSOs, the priority CSOs. And anyway, that's the question. Why is that? Does anyone know why we do not in Manhattan have any contract? And I'm not sure who the contract would be with. Those two questions, I guess.
I can parse that language. They don't have a construction contract with a construction contractor to build green infrastructure in Manhattan. When we embarked on the project in Community Board 3 and 6, we essentially are trying to build green infrastructure in those areas. And, I was kind of told, good luck. It's really, really hard in Manhattan to find sites where you can actually do this work. Now that I'm understanding this location, I think it's right on top of a subway station. And that's one of the things I didn't mention that makes things challenging, because there's a very large offset. I think it's 50 feet from an MTA facility. So they don't want water being loaded into the ground near their facilities. And so that's one of the things that precludes us from doing stormwater infiltration. That is not to say that, you can't have the lovely green space depicted here. It's just, it might be really challenging to bring stormwater into it. And just as a reminder, going all the way back to the beginning of my presentation, there are benefits to just greening, not necessarily taking stormwater. There are there are benefits of cooling, benefits of reducing paved area that are really significant. It's just when you're talking about green infrastructure, kind of loading up water in a specific location, and that was very hard to do in Manhattan.
Well, we'd be very satisfied with the greening for in using permeable materials there, and vegetation, just as you described, would be of great value. It just sounds as if the funding of it is only through some sort of private public enterprise rather than complete public funding, for example, through DEP. Is that correct? I mean, in other words, if folks just want to see this the way it looks in the lower right-hand corner, much like the Harlem slide you showed at 116th Street when you started your presentation, how would that be done?
That could be done with council funding. That could be done with, as you say, a public-private partnership.
Okay, thank you very much for answering my questions and others. Are there any, oh, I do see a few more hands up, so I'm going to ask, sorry, the chair of our transportation committee, Betty Kay. Thanks, Betty, go ahead.
I don't know who is the correct person to ask, so I'm going to start. Everything that I'm hearing, very interesting. But what I'm not hearing is there any group, agency, whatever, responsible for identifying strategic places for putting these various build structures? As well as, I guess the second part of that, is there any map that's been laid out for our area that shows what is not a good place for collecting water because of the subway being too close, because of other underground? So I feel like we're doing just a hunt and search. We find a place and say, oh, this would be nice to be green. When people are thinking, oh, we're collecting water, can we kind of cut to what's possible?
Again, this is sort of only as good as hearsay because I don't work for DEP, but the way I understand it is that they have done that strategic analysis, and what they've learned is that they should be spending these dollars in Queens and Brooklyn and the Bronx in order to capture the most stormwater in the most cost-effective way, which is ultimately their goal. And so that is my understanding. Now, when we have another source of funds like CB3 right now, we can then do that analysis, and we're actively doing it in CB3. We're combing every spot and trying to make maps that tell us where we should consider green infrastructure and where we should avoid. And then we have to do testing to confirm. And then whatever spots are left will be the ones where we can build. And so it's unfortunately a very labor-intensive process just to find the locations. And we don't have a kind of go-to map, for the whole city. But to go back to my first statement, I think that Manhattan's a really expensive and challenging proposition. And so I don't, I'm not sure what more to say relative to, it's ultimately DEP's decision to focus their funding where they have. And I think that's perhaps why you got the message you got from DEP.
Well, thanks, because given that Manhattan is so challenging, and that's not a surprise to me. How valuable are permeable surfaces? Can the water and how much can really run down before it's going to flood and damage something that's below ground versus something that's above ground?
It's a very specific question. I will say green infrastructure is loading water in a specific place. It's not just making, the surface permeable. We can make the surface permeable in most places. It's where we choose to load the water by directing lots of water to that place. And that's where we have to be very careful and do a lot of testing and analysis of the soil so that we don't create a problem. So again, you can have permeability in a project like the one on the screen, but that's a different thing than loading up a space with water, which finding those places is what brings funding. Yeah.
Great, well, thank you, because then we'll get back to Jen and the DOT with what they do to look at before they put a permeable surface in. So, thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Betty. Francis Curtis, welcome.
Hi, thank you, Alice, for letting me speak. This whole presentation is very it's fascinating. I'm always been a big proponent of green spaces since I live on the lower east side of the district, and I noticed on your map there's one little teeny green speck over by the Brooklyn Bridge, and that's the area that I live in. I noticed that that's the only area where there's not, well, the whole CB1 area does not have a lot of green specks, but this is one that is noticeably outstanding in that particular area. Tribeca, where they were focusing on the project that Alice, that you were just discussing. That's a shame that that's where it is, but I hope that the committee will get a list of those places, that those 14 green spaces in CB1, so that I can find out where that particular space is. And thank you for the work that you do under very, seems like very difficult circumstances, especially the funding part. That really has me concerned, that you would be such a needed, especially nowadays with everything that's going on with climate change and so forth, so on, that your department has to operate under the financial constraints that you have, but we'll deal with it. But the list, I hope we will be able to get in the future, unless you happen to know what that little speck of green is underneath the Brooklyn Bridge. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Francis. I suspect that someone will know what that little speck of green is who has her hand up, which is under the Brooklyn Bridge, perhaps. Rosa Chang.
Hi, thank you. Yes,
Hey,
I know where the green specks are. So, hi, Francis. Hi, Alice. So, Francis, the green specks that they had were, number one was the western half of Peckslip Park. I don't know why they don't have the entirety of Peckslip Park there. Then the other section was Drumgoole Park, which is that DOT, sort of that area directly behind Pace. And
Pace
then
and 100 Gold.
Yeah, and then the other part was at the very end, the terminus of the Brooklyn Bridge, where they have the little bit of planting areas as it ends at Center Street. So does that make sense?
It certainly does.
I know. Yeah, definitely.
In terms of the locations. So
gotcha.
Yeah, that was the first thing I zoomed in on too. But now that I'm on, can I ask a question as well?
Of course.
So my question would be, as many of you probably know, I'm working on making a park underneath the Brooklyn Bridge. And for anybody who's spent any time there underneath the Brooklyn Bridge, you'll realize that on essentially every other structural column, there's a huge drainage spout that comes off of pretty much, actually, well, every ramp that encircles around that area that connects to either the bridge or the FDR. And so I think that that is actually an amazing opportunity for some rainwater filtration and some stormwater runoff and retention possibilities, exactly like the ones that we're talking about tonight. And I think it would be a really great way to integrate that into Manhattan, as we are discussing the lack of such thing and the budget for such thing in Manhattan. And I'm wondering how we would try to pursue that logistically and financially and everything else. Or is that too broad? And I'm not asking any specific person. Anyone who is capable of answering that question would be welcome.
Well, I will say that those pipes are referred to as scuppers, and there are a number of projects around the city where stormwater from scuppers has been captured. We have one in design on the Harlem River, right by Bridge Park. I'm sorry, it's called Bridge Park. It's right by the High Bridge. So the scupper, first you have to kind of slow down the water because it's got a lot of velocity because there's so much of it in that pipe. And then, so we have these sort of capture areas that are slowing down the water, and then they're going to go into rain gardens that are kind of integrated into the park that we're designing there along the Bronx waterfront. So, but there are other examples under the BQE and I think the Grand Central Parkway, going into Flushing Meadows. Like there are a lot of examples, and the main challenge is that if you want to do anything to capture particulates with plants, you need sun. And so getting the water out from under the structure and out in the sun is really, really an important thing. And we've learned that looking at precedents where they didn't do that, it's very, very difficult to get plants to thrive deep shade and under the stresses that come with stormwater. So that's some advice I have. And beyond that, I don't have advice. I have a little visitor who cannot be kept out of the room any longer.
Hi,
Well,
little visitor. We are blessed with a lot of sun actually on the southern portion. The northern portion, I guess, more ambient light because the bridge is pretty massive. But that's very helpful. Oh, we're talking about the Brooklyn Bridge and plants underneath the Brooklyn Bridge and how we're going to deal with water coming off the Brooklyn Bridge. Hi. And how about funding opportunities as relates to DEP and maybe getting some for Manhattan?
Is that a question for DOT?
I don't know. Can it be?
I don't either.
You talk to so many people?
Yes.
DOT there, Jennifer, do you have a response to that? Can you help out? And that's a great question.
I don't have a response to that unless Gavin does.
I think we're generally in favor of finding solutions, but yeah, it's a water focused solution and a drainage focused solution, which is not so much the strength of DOT. We'd be happy to work with DEP or folks if they had a project that was trying to solve that problem in any given location. But I think we'd be looking for DEP to take the lead on it and then bring us in, and we could help out where we could.
Okay, I'd love to put it on your radar as a focused location where we would like to address this problem.
So we'll look forward. I think, Matt, you volunteered to get us those 14 places in addition to the ones that might not have been specifically noted, the under the Brooklyn Bridge that Rose is referring to, so that we can start, and in answer to Betty's really smart idea that we really need a map of all this so we can kind of keep track, which was one of the problems that we've had for a long time. So I'm hopeful you can help us with that, just that map of.
Absolutely. Yeah, I will follow up with that list.
And then I know Jennifer was going to follow up on the specifics about Barnett Newman, which has been in answer to Francis's point about, looking at many places. Yes, indeed. This, however, has been on the books, I think, since I want to say 2005 at the Parks Department. It's been noted in your budget requests, in our budget requests. So just, that's, what is that, 16 years. So, we'd like to see some movement forward. I think we have one more member who has a question, and then we'll move on to the next topic. And thanks everyone for your patience. It's been fascinating. Gerald Forsberg.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Alice. I do have two questions. I want to belabor Barnett Newman Park for a minute, and I don't need a full history lesson here, but I am very familiar with this triangle. My wife and I cross that street quite often, and it seems very pedestrians seem very vulnerable crossing that street at that location. And I guess two questions would be: first off, what did the developer receive for offering up this original wonderful design that we got? And did that developer, what was offered, and then did the developer actually receive something from that? And is there a enforcement mechanism in place to continue with the developer? Just saying, hey, I don't have the money. If the developer actually receives something for that, it seems to be unheard of. And I guess my other question, that's my first question. My second question is, does DOT not have the funds or the authority to mitigate safer streets in Manhattan? I thought that was specifically what DOT was about. In other words, would DOT have the funds for this particular park in an effort to slow the traffic coming through there?
I'll let DOT answer that one. I can help you out on the first part, and I'm happy to take that offline. But I'll just quickly jump in with the first part, which is that, yes, the developer, DDG, received an entire story built onto their building with the promise that this would happen. They had promised it not only to the community, but also to the foundation of Barnett Newman Foundation and others. There's a record of this. As I said, the Manhattan Borough President and Councilmember Chin actually wrote a letter in 2019 commemorating this. No, there are no actions that can be taken at the Board of Standard Appeals level where this was stated, but never memorialized. Let it be a lesson. Everything needs to be in writing. So that's where it is at. I'll let DOT take over on your second question.
So I would say for this location, I don't think there was a actual project for us to implement improvements. I know the extension that we have there was part of a overall project. Maybe it was related to the bike lane, but I don't have all that information with me right now. I think that's something I have to bring back to the board or provide information about it, because I think there was a project at some point where we presented it and it included that extension, and that's supposed to help with some of the safety issues in that area.
Thank you, Jennifer. That would be great. I just want to reiterate that there is a very serious concern about pedestrians crossing there, and it seems like there's a wonderful plan that's already been floated out there, and maybe we can all work together on this.
Okay.
Great. We'll look forward to hearing from you. Yeah, we'll follow up. Thanks so much. I think now I can say that is over. The last question. It was a terrific presentation. Thanks very much for your patience in answering all the questions and the presentation itself. There's quite a bit of follow up, so we'll look forward to getting that. And I know Diana Sweetai from the office will do so with you. And I think I can simply say again, thank you. And we will now move on to the second item on our agenda, which is a very important one, the birds, protecting birds in Community District 1. This is a discussion with Caitlin Parkins, who's the Associate Director of Conservation and Science at the New York City Audubon Society. Thank you so much for coming, Caitlin. We really look forward to hearing your presentation, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I am attempting to get WebEx to share my presentation. Give me 1 second. I'm actually not super familiar with WebEx, and so I'm not sure why it's not giving me the option to do this, but if you bear with me for just a second. Sorry, everybody.
No problem.
Caitlin, I just passed you presenter privileges, so you should be able to go into
Yeah,
the menu now
yeah,
and
it's
access
just
that.
I share in full screen from Google Slides usually, but it's giving me the option to share my screen and actually share my desktop, which nobody here really wants to see, I promise. So I just quickly am trying to open it in PowerPoint. My computer doesn't always do well with PowerPoint, which is why I typically use Google Slides. Let me just see here. Yeah. Okay, can you see my?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that, everyone. Thanks for your patience. Yes, I am the Associate Director of Conservation for New York City Audubon. We are a nonprofit that works to protect birds and their habitat for the benefit of both the birds and the people in New York City. And we do that through advocacy, education, and community engagement and conservation research. And today I'm going to basically do a speed version of a talk I typically give in about 30 minutes about bird window collisions. So I'll go over what birds hit windows, when and why, how collisions can be prevented, and then also the current and pending New York City specific legislation about bird window collisions. And I think I'm here today, and I think this is on a lot of your radars because of an event that happened on September 14th, 2021. One of our Project Safe Flight is our collision monitoring program. One of our volunteers who goes out and monitors buildings for birds that have died or been injured in collisions with windows every morning went out to the World Trade Complex where she was surveying and found 226 birds dead at the World Trade Center campus. And she tweeted about it with this photo, and it was picked up by the media and sort of got a lot of publicity. And, you know, as upset as we are for any bird deaths, I will say that the media attention that this event got has actually been quite beneficial in terms of just getting people more aware of this issue. Of course, this isn't a New York City problem or even a financial district problem or an East Coast problem. It's actually estimated that in the US alone, 100 million to 1 billion birds die due to window collisions every single year. So this is actually the second largest direct cause of bird mortality in the country. And 100 million to 1 billion birds a year, you might think, oh, I've seen a bird hit a window here and there. These numbers really add up quickly, and it can actually lead to extirpations of species, so species going extinct in specific areas. And of course, we know birds are threatened due to climate change and habitat loss and all of these other things. And so collisions is just like one more straw that these birds have to deal with, and we don't know which straw it is. It's going to break the camel's back, so to speak. And so why does this happen? We'll have to go back and tell a little story about birds in New York City. So every year, twice a year, in the fall and the spring, hundreds of millions across, millions and millions and millions of tiny songbirds of all different species migrate from where they winter, or they spend what we consider the winter in South and Central America and even the Southern US, and they head up to the Arctic Circle and Northern North America to breed, and then they come back down in the fall. And so following their migration routes, we actually have millions of birds migrating over and through New York City every single year. And most of these birds migrate at night. So if you can imagine, we're all asleep and there are just millions of birds traveling above us over the dark or through the dark of night. And of course, these birds have to stop and rest and refuel themselves as they go. And typically they would land here in a beautiful estuary and wooded forest for millions of years of evolution. And now we've put this in their path. And so in New York City, there are two main direct threats to birds during migration. Those are light and glass, and I'll go over each of these individually and then kind of talk about how they tie together. So first, the night problem, the light problem. Lighthouses have been known since they existed to kill birds. Often after foggy mornings, lighthouse keepers would wake up and write in their journals about all the dead birds littered on the ground. Now we understand that light both attracts and disorients migratory birds. So as they're flying at night, they're using the magnetic cues of the earth, they're using visual cues of the moon. And for whatever reason, and this is not my specific area of research, birds are drawn into lights. And we can see this in sort of the modern times when we look at the tribute and light memorial. So this is the picture on the right. That's not confetti in the beams, obviously. Those are individual tiny migratory birds. And we know through a research collaboration with Cornell University that individual birds are pulled into these beams. So if you look at the diagram B and C over here on the right, cool colors, this is radar. Cool colors mean fewer birds. Hot, warm colors like red and yellow mean lots of birds. When the lights are off, there are fairly few birds around the tribute. When the lights are on, birds are pulled in from up to several kilometers away and kind of condense around the lights and fly around in circles. And so this is a way we've learned about how light affects birds, attracts, disorients. And we've worked out a system with the tribute producers. We turn the lights off when there are too many birds, and this saves lots of birds. But you can imagine that light, you know, not every light installation, not every building has a New York City Audubon volunteer sitting on it every night saying, okay, there's too many birds here, you gotta turn it off. And so those lights continue to affect birds. Also, not just bright light installations, but the general urban glow attracts the birds in. So this is an aerial satellite view of New York City. You know, this is all extremely brightly lit. And so if you're a migratory bird and you're flying over, you might just be attracted to this. And even if you aren't initially like drawn into a bright beam, it's still, you are still attracted into a city where there are many other threats that could potentially hurt you. So how does light affect bird collision? So light causes disorientation. Birds can get trapped and kind of exhausted and land in places that they shouldn't. There's been some research to show that collisions are actually increased at lit windows, especially atriums. If you're thinking about Community Board 1, imagine the Winter Garden at Brookfield Place. Birds do hit that specific location at night because of the lights. And of course, light just draws birds into urban areas where other threats exist. But birds aren't just flying through and over New York City, bouncing off of buildings while they're migrating. The lights kind of draw them in and then they're at risk. The majority of collisions in New York City are daytime collisions caused by glass, which is issue number 2, the day problem. If you look at the picture on the left and you're a bird, you might look at this, or actually even if you're a person looking at this photo, are these trees reflected in a window? Are these just trees? Are these trees seen through a panel of glass? If we zoom out, like the picture on the right, we can see mullions and architectural cues that show us, okay, this is a reflection in glass. Birds don't understand architectural cues. They see trees that they can fly to, and they do so very quickly and very forcefully, and they hit these windows and often die. Glass can kill birds if it reflects vegetation, like here on the left, vegetation behind glass, like in atriums, and of course glass walkways. There's another example of this at Brookfield Place where there's a glass walkway and birds just stream into it constantly through the morning because they can see all the way through and they just don't realize that there's a solid barrier. This is, of course, fixable. We can put visual indicators that are fairly close together. Those visual indicators are solid barriers. Birds see them and say, okay, I can't fly through that. And it's so close to the other one that I can't fly between them. And that distance is usually 2 by 4 or ideally 2 by 2 inches apart. So your visual indicators can't just be like one dot in the middle of glass. It has to be a pattern of dots that are fairly close together. You can do this with things as inexpensive and as tempera paint murals on glass, or you can go into, you know, much more expensive and aesthetically pleasing you know, solutions such as ceramic frit in glass, like this dot pattern glass that's here on the right. This is actually the glass from the Javits Center renovation. The Javits Center was a bird killing building, and collisions were reduced there after the renovation with this low reflectivity ceramic frit glass by over 90%. Another great mitigation case study is in your community board. This is Liberty Park. This railing, birds could essentially see vegetation on both sides, didn't perceive it as a solid barrier. Another Project Safe Light, actually the same Project Safe Light volunteer, I think, tweeted about it. The media picked it up and Port Authority responded quite quickly and put this product, is called Feather Friendly. It is just a dot pattern on the glass. Collisions have been significantly reduced at this location. So just a few quick collision myths that I want to bust that I hear a lot. One is that bird window collisions are a skyscraper issue. This isn't the case. Most collisions occur on the lower 200 feet of a building. Remember, birds aren't flying over at night and bouncing off of buildings. They're attracted in, and most of them are colliding the next day while they're around the buildings foraging. Birds tend to stay within the tree canopy, so essentially from the tree level and down is where most of the collisions happen. The second myth is that birds that fly away after colliding will survive. This makes people feel better. They're like, oh, this bird collided, but it flew away. It's going to be fine. The vast majority of these birds likely die later. There are also unknown long-term effects on these birds, so it's possible that they don't reproduce or migrate correctly after they sustain these collisions, mainly because of brain damage. Please do still help injured or stunned birds. The Wild Bird Fund, which is a rehabilitation center on the Upper West Side, will take these birds. So if you do see an injured bird, please, first thing first, get it off the street. And then if you can, get it to a rehabber. And if you can't, we'll try to find someone to help you do so. And then finally, again, just to emphasize that collisions don't always, so this myth is collisions happen at night, not necessarily true. Most collisions happen during the day when birds are resting and refueling. I just want to really get this across because I think a lot of people hear that light causes collisions and they think they can just turn their lights out and wipe their hands and say, oh, we fixed this issue. And often that is not the case. Turning the lights out might be able to help reduce these mass mortality events, which are usually associated with heavy migration and light and low cloud ceilings and weather patterns. But the sort of daily accumulation of daytime collisions adds up to far more birds over the course of the season. And so light is part of the issue, but really glass needs to be fixed as well. And so from there, collision prevention. First, we can fix glass, apply those markers in a 2x2 pattern on the outside of the glass. Don't use hawk silhouettes, noise deterrents. Things that seem really easy tend to not work. So you really do have to put film with a pattern on an entire glass panel to make it bird safe. You can't just like stick a hawk decal in the middle of it, unfortunately. And reducing lighting will help. We can keep birds from being attracted to areas that are unsafe, and we can reduce those nighttime collisions by turning off floodlights, turning off lights on unoccupied building floors, using shielded light that directs downwards instead of upwards, and installing automatic motion sensors on lights. Safety is often a big issue. And as long as there is motion sensor lights, those lights will be on if there are people in the area, but we can have darkness when it's unnecessary. And there are, just briefly about the policy, Local Law 15 was passed in 2019, was supposed to go into effect in 2020. It actually went into effect in early 2021. It's New York City's bird-friendly building law, and it requires new buildings to be bird-friendly to the first 75 feet. And it applies to new buildings and buildings that are having renovations where they're replacing the majority of the glass. There is a guidance document on this, which I think will be shared in the chat that you can look at to see the details of this bill. There is currently no lights out legislation in. There are 3 bills in the city council right now. They have been just sitting since 2018. There are 2 that are based on bird friendly. So policies, so it's city-owned buildings and then also privately owned buildings, businesses that require non-essential outdoor lighting to be off during migration between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. And there's another bill that has an energy focus, not a bird-friendly focus, but could potentially help birds. This last one, which requires motion sensor lights in city buildings so that the lights are off when offices are not occupied. And with that, yeah, again, this was sort of the speed version of this talk, so I'm happy to clarify anything, answer questions, etc. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Caitlin. That was really sobering and excellent. Thanks very much. Okay, committee members, community board members, questions? I see Gerald Forsberg.
Oh, sorry, I'm trying to unmute here. Yeah, I'll go ahead and kick this off. I just have a question. The bird friendly to the first 75 feet, is that largely, where does that law come from? Is it because typically birds don't fly above 75 feet or just what? And
yeah,
go ahead.
So that was a compromise. Like I said, the vast majority of collisions are on the lower levels of the building. So by requiring bird friendly only on the lower portions of the building, we could get buy-in from developers, from REBNY, and also save the most birds. Collisions do happen at upper levels of buildings, but not nearly as many. And my understanding is that there are lots of other building codes below 75 feet. There's lots of other things that developers have to do. And so that was sort of an easy number to pick. It's just like one more thing they have to do below 75 feet. And so all of that was a compromise to get something passed in the city council that would save the most birds and also not be, fought to the death by REBNY and other developers.
Thanks, Caitlin. Also, one other question then is, you had mentioned about other codes that were potentially helpful for protecting the bird population. What about green roof codes? Where are we with that in New York City?
Yeah, that's great. So my understanding is there is green roof, there's legislation that requires solar or green roof on new buildings in New York City. And I should have mentioned this, but local law 15 also requires bird-friendly materials to be used adjacent to any green roof so that we're not attracting birds in to green roofs and then setting up sort of a glass death trap there. So green roofs are absolutely, our and other research has shown that they make excellent wildlife habitat. And so we hope that people will choose green roofs when they're making the decision between solar and green.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bob Steck.
I was wondering what's happened, what we've learned this year about what's happened to the bird populations. For myself, I watch this as closely as possible, and I've noticed many, many fewer varieties and many, many fewer birds this year than ever before in my life. And I was wondering if that was accurate and what kind of statistics are kept on these kinds of matters.
Yeah, so we know that the statistic is like we've lost like a quarter of our birds since the 70s. Bird populations are very much in decline, and that includes relatively common species that folks are really used to seeing. It's a little hard to say from year to year because a lot of the birds that we have in New York City, we do get during those migratory periods, and it's very can be affected by weather and other temporal variation. So it's a little hard to give statistics on how like our birds are doing this year. But as we look at long-term trends, bird populations are declining. And of course, that is due to habitat loss and climate change and pesticides, but also due to collisions and feral and free roaming cats. And so in New York City specifically, the collisions issue and is one that we can at least address to affect that direct mortality, like the bird bodies on the ground. But we do need to address other things like habitat loss and climate change to help save our birds.
So if it's, this presentation was about collisions, but what's the next, is that the top cause of loss that we have in the city, or what second and third, and what other things can we do?
Yeah. So is in terms of direct mortality of birds, things that are killing birds, I would say collisions is number one in the city. Feral and free roaming cats is another issue in New York City for sure. Climate change is going to be a big issue, and we still don't quite understand how that's going to affect birds. And then habitat loss. So restoring our grasslands, restoring our wetlands, keeping our forests healthy, adding habitat through green infrastructure are all things. I loved listening to the green infrastructure conversation you had earlier, because we think of green infrastructure as stormwater management and urban heat island effect, but green infrastructure also provides habitat for wildlife. It is a great, birds will use little tiny pocket parks and little tiny triangles of good habitat. So planting native plants in those green spaces is another way you can help protect birds. But I would say the collisions issue kills more birds in New York City than anything else. And that's why it is our priority focus.
Would going above 75 feet do any good? Or, is that the place, is that a holding pattern because that's politically possible?
Yeah, would it do any good? I don't necessarily think the amount of good that it would do would be proportional to the amount of effort that it would take to get it done. I think before we consider that, we need lights out legislation, and we need to get these buildings that are not affected by local law 15 to retrofit their glass. So there are lots of buildings that are existing and have no plans to renovate, and those buildings are killing lots of birds. And so we need to put pressure on and work with those buildings to mitigate the issue before we consider, going higher with bird-friendly legislation.
So do you have any kind of tips for what Community Board 1 or other community boards can do where we can actually take an action that matters?
Yeah, I guess my problem, or the reason I don't know what Community Board 1 is able to do. I don't know what is within the bounds of community boards, but if there's any way that Community Board 1 can influence buildings that exist within your district that kill birds, including the World Trade Center complex. Essentially, I have like a list of addresses where we know collisions happen, but the vast majority of collisions in New York City happen in Community Board 1. So if you have any way to influence buildings to put mitigation, to put film on their windows, to do anything to prevent collisions at the buildings, that would of course be helpful for us.
So if you could send us the list, and maybe our board chair and Diana can work to help develop something, because if it is focused on a CB1 problem, then we really should act. So thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, Bob. I think we should, I'm going to propose a resolution probably once we've received your list. That'll be helpful. I don't know, do any members object to that, to have a resolution in support of this idea that we attempt to, look a little bit more specifically at our community board vis-a-vis the bird populations? I don't know if we have resolutions like that. I'm going to do a little bit of research with Diana before we launch that, but
I think it's a great idea.
That's right. And if we could have the list of not only the buildings, but also what the buildings could do in terms of the range of mitigations that they could do, especially the lowest cost option, that would be helpful too, in terms of telling them what they could do to do it at the lowest cost.
So we have bird-friendly building design guidelines, and we have resources on potential mitigation. I will say that the type of mitigation put in place is very context dependent. It depends on the type of building, the type of glass, their budget. So our capacity to to just give a list of here's the lowest cost option that applies to everyone is limited. We are willing to work with individual buildings to do a site visit and advise. We are currently working with Durst and with Silverstein on 1, 3, 4, and 7 World Trade. And we are also attempting to work with Brookfield Place on their complex as well, with some pushback. So I'm just want to be realistic in what I can give. I can say these are the options, but I can't give a blanket, this is the lowest cost option that'll work for everybody. If you don't mind, could I just share my screen and show you folks one additional thing, one slide?
Of course.
So I just want to show, so we do have our collision monitoring. We do also have a website called dbird.org where anyone, I should have had this in my presentation, my apologies, where anyone can report a collision in New York City. So this is data from dBird. All of those orange points are dead birds. Those yellow points are injured birds. This is just from 2021. And if you look at the entire map of Manhattan and start to zoom in, you see what I start to mean about Community Board 1 containing some of these biggest issues. So you can really see some of Brookfield Place, some of the World Trade Center over here, and then some other collisions. And we can also look at data from 2020, and you can see clusters around these buildings as well. And then all the way back to 2019. So I can also provide maps of these data if those would be helpful for you folks.
Can I just ask one more question?
Okay.
I was wondering on Governor's Island, if we have taller buildings, are there any statistics on Governor's Island, or if there's a taller building or any buildings on Governor's Island, would it make a difference in the migration?
No, I mean, the height of the building shouldn't affect. If the building is designed to be bird friendly, which all buildings that are constructed on Governor's Island should be in accordance with local law 15, they can be designed to be bird friendly and it shouldn't be an issue. Again, height is really not the issue here. It's the design of the building. It's the glass that is used. It's the landscaping that is used around the building. Height is not the main issue in collisions.
Okay,
Thank you.
Rosa Chang.
I just want to share quickly that I actually walk through the World Trade Center area all the time, and I did come across what I'm hoping was a stunned bird, but could also very likely have been a dead bird right outside. And I stole one of their pylons and just sort of put it on either side, hoping to give it time to recover without someone stepping on it by accident. And the security guard there told me that actually they have a 30-minute sort of cycle of a person coming by and sweeping up all of the dead birds. So what's sort of horrifying to me about that image that you showed at the beginning of the dead birds that your volunteer collected is that most likely that was only whatever they were able to catch within a 30-minute window.
Correct.
Because all of the other ones were in the garbage.
Absolutely correct. We've actually found that our volunteers are really good at finding birds, yet they still only find around 23% of the birds that actually collide with windows. Most are swept up. Some will be carried away by predators. Herring gulls and even squirrels have learned that the birds, die or are stunned and carry them off. So that is a really excellent point. What Melissa found that day is only a tiny portion, and the birds that we count and get recorded are only a tiny portion of the actual number of birds that collide.
Wow.
Yeah, that was 30 minutes worth. That's horrifying.
Wow. Michael Frankauer.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. I mostly just wanted to quickly thank Caitlin for the presentation and for the work that your organization's doing. I've been following this a little bit since I had started reading about the way that the tribute lights impacted birds, I think a year or two ago. So I'm really glad you're here, and I strongly support us, coming up with a resolution. Given that the disproportionate amount of the damage is done in our district, I think it's a natural issue for our community board to take a leadership role on. And obviously support us reaching out to businesses one-off, but I hope that maybe we can get some traction on some of those stagnant city council bills. Maybe we can work with our council member's office to see if we can get some traction there. And I think there's some natural synergies, obviously, with our environmental committee, given that some of those bills will also help us reduce energy consumption. I always look out at all the office buildings in our district, and just note how much energy is being used when no one's there in the middle of the night. So I guess to that, my only quick question is, of those bills that are kind of sticking around in the city council, do those pretty well encapsulate what the Audubon Society would like to get passed or get put into building regulations, or is there more or less?
I think that the combination of the two bills that one applies to city buildings and one applies to private entities that require outdoor illumination to be off during migration between the hours of 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. would be ideal. That's really what we're looking for. I will say that we also recognize that light pollution hurts people as well. And so we're a bird organization, and we really are focusing on migration season and the time of both the time of year and the time of day that affects birds the most. But in reality, light pollution has been linked to higher rates of breast and prostate cancer. Light pollution affects communities of color disproportionately. So I think that, considering that to be year-round would also be something that a community board or other entity might want to consider. But from the bird perspective, those do really address the light pollution issue for us.
Perfect. Thanks. And thanks so much for coming to talk to us.
Yeah, thanks, Caitlin. Just to follow up on that specifically, why do you think the 3 pieces of legislation aren't going forward? Is there anything more than just backlog?
That is a really good question that unfortunately I don't know the answer to. Our advocacy staff person has been on leave since early 2020, and I'm a scientist, not a policy person. So unfortunately, I don't have the answer for that at this time.
Okay, thanks. Betty Kay.
Yes. I am more the practical person. So thank you for the presentation. I noticed a lot I live in Battery Park City, and I noticed where a lot of your cluster is over there. So my questions are, have you spoken with Nick Spordone at the authority?
At the Battery Park City Authority?
Authority, correct.
I have not, and to my knowledge, no one in my organization has, but I can double check on that. And if someone would like to put us in touch, I'd be happy to speak with them.
Okay, look, the next one's going to be related to it, and Lucian Reynolds can certainly do that, the district manager at CB1. Anyway, Nick Spordone is wonderful to work with. The Battery Park City Authority very much has it on their agenda to look after these things. And they own all the land that all the buildings are on. So they are the best for working with Brookfield, as well as Goldman Sachs and anybody else with a large building. The other thing, because I live near the ferry terminal, which is here, we have a lot of jurisdictions here in Battery Park City, although we're state. Battery Park City Authority ferry dock, where we get a lot of noise complaints in my building, is actually owned and controlled by the New Jersey Port Authority, which of course controls the World Trade Center. We have had lots of yelling and screaming, trying to get them to do something about the noise in their ferry docks. Anyway, at the very last meeting of the Battery Park City Committee, we met a woman named Beth Rooney from the Port Authority. Wonderful person to work with. And I just looked her up. And in fact, in LinkedIn, I thought she was community relations. Lucian Reynolds, again, is the one who found her contact. She was wonderful. She was very responsive, which we've never gotten from the Port Authority before. And she is the deputy director at the Port Authority. So she could probably give you a lot of help at the World Trade Center.
Yes, we actually do have a contact at Port Authority that we have been working with. Port Authority has been extremely helpful in helping us make contact with Durst and Silverstein and others that actually are in charge, can make decisions about changing those buildings. I have been really pleasantly surprised at the amount of attention Port Authority is doing this, and they have put several initiatives in place in hopes of reducing collisions to the extent they can and encouraging their, tenants. And I realize that the property ownership there and who manages and co-owns is a little complicated. But I've been really happy with Port Authority. They've been a great partner the
Well,
last,
great, because
year.
that's the same kind of complexity we have with the ferry dock, where they own it, but someone else manages it. But as I said, Beth Rooney made a comment about being new, very effective person. So if you may want to reach out to find out who she is, and she was helpful in ways that, so Mike Lavery still came on, but she was the one actually taking control.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Betty.
Thank
you. Deda Al. Yeah. Deda? Okay. You can come back to Deda. I'm going to open this up to the public, and I'm going to ask to hear from Catherine Quail from the Wild Bird Fund.
Hi, thank you, Alice.
Thank you.
Can you hear me all right?
Loud and clear.
Okay, great. Yes, thank you so much for addressing this issue. I wanted to speak on the behalf of the Wild Bird Fund. Caitlin has done an excellent job of giving you the scope of the problem. I think everyone understands at this point how serious it is and how critical it is. But I wanted to just give you a brief perspective from the wildlife rehabbers. The Wild Bird Fund, in case you don't know, is the only wildlife rehab center in New York City. And believe it or not, we are about to hit 8,000 patients for this year, which is just an incredible number of patients in our small clinic on the Upper West Side. Approximately 1,200 of those this year will be window strike patients. In the last 2 years, we have seen about 2,140 window strike patients. These are the ones, the very, very few that have the double luck of 1, surviving the collision, and 2, being rescued by someone who sees them and who knows what to do. Many of these people are Project Safe Flight volunteers. Many are probably on this call and are, could share their stories with you. But lots of them are just people who are going about their day and find a bird and stop to pick it up and change all their plans to come to us, bring it to us in their pocket, in a paper bag, in a box. So as Caitlin mentioned at the beginning of this is also a people issue. People are very upset and very concerned about this problem. I just wanted to share some quick statistics about how, from our perspective, the Community Board 1 area is a part of this issue. 34% of our patients in the last 2 years, that's 731 birds, came from Lower Manhattan, primarily the World Trade Center area. To break that down even further, 40% of them collided with windows at Brookfield Place alone. That's 302 patients. This is a very, very specific area that is causing a really dramatic problem that can be fixed. 36% of the patients came from the rest of the World Trade Center campus. They come from 54 species, all of them migrants, most of them small songbirds. There are some larger birds. The woodcock season is just beginning. Someone just texted me that we got our first woodcock, and there will be another 100 before the season's out. A red-tailed hawk was collided with a window down there. Bats collided with windows. So you understand that these birds are rescued by someone. They are brought to the center. They have, almost all of them have concussions. They have all kinds of other injuries, eye injuries, fractures. And we can do many things for them. We can give them anti-inflammatory medication. We can give them wound care. We can give them, more importantly, just a quiet, safe place to recover without being worried about being swept up or stepped on. But still, after all that, only 40% of the ones we treat survive to be released. So it's that release process is incredibly rewarding, but those 60% who don't make it after all that is just heartbreaking. We have been grateful to work with New York City Audubon on trying to get the word out about what is going on in this area and across the city. And we would love to be a resource for you if you have any questions. And we would also love, your advice about any ways we can also help, along with Caitlin and the rest of New York City Audubon, to contact people in that area and get some of these windows fixed.
Thanks very much, Catherine. That's really incredible information. And we will certainly be in touch, and we obviously are advocating for a resolution, which was certainly right, and you will receive any information, further information, please do share it. And thanks for what you've already shared. Michelle Ashkin.
Yes, hi. My name is Michelle Ashkin. I'm a Battery Park City resident. I've been very involved with wildlife issues here. I'm a wildlife rehabber. I'm also the co-director of education for the Wild Bird Fund. So I get a lot of calls just about every day about people finding birds, and I guide them through what to do and where to take them. And it's very distressing. But I just wanted to mention very quickly that I had met with my colleague and friend Esther, who spoke earlier about wetlands, asked a question about wetlands. We had contacted Nick about this, and we had set up a meeting, and forgive me, but I don't remember the names of everybody with whom we met, but we met with some of the top people at Brookfield to discuss this issue, and Caitlin was involved with that as well to some degree. She had sent information over, and then we had followed up to discuss with them what they might be willing to do, or what they could actually use on the windows and where some of the hot spots were and so on. And so there has been a discussion which we were supposed to follow up with, and we unfortunately were unable to follow up after that original meeting. So I think it would be, I'd be very happy, I guess Esther would too, to discuss with you what we've already discussed with them, so you have more information before you actually go into meetings with them, because we can tell you what they've said and how they feel and what we've discussed and where we left it, if that would be helpful.
I assume this is to Caitlin, but it would be helpful if you
No, this was to whoever. I said, I know you wanted to write, Alice, I don't know who it was who mentioned the, writing of the resolution. But I will be happy to talk to anybody on the board who wants to know, what we discussed, what they at that point said they would be possibly willing to do, and where their bottom line was in terms of what they didn't want to do. I don't want to discuss it here, but I'd be happy to tell you so that when you go into discussion with them, if you have this information you have this information about what's already been discussed.
Well, we thank you, Michelle. That's, now I understand better. Forgive me. That would be great. I think Diana Sweetie from our office will be happy to follow up with you, and appreciate your time there. Thanks.
Okay, great.
Esther Regelson.
Hi. Thank you. And Caitlin, thank you so much for that great presentation. I just want to reiterate with Michelle that we did meet with Brookfield. They didn't want to mar the aesthetic of the Winter Garden, and they wouldn't admit that there were birds out falling through the skies in front of them. They said their janitors never see birds. So they give a lot of pushback. And we did want to meet with them again this fall, but couldn't manage it with our time schedules. However, I also want to point out that a lot of those dots that Caitlin showed you on the map are some of which I put in because I keep finding dead birds, especially at the overpass on Liberty when I pass through almost every day. But another place that's very overlooked is the ferry dock at the Battery Terminal. I see birds, dead birds all along the gratings by the ferry terminal. They need to do something, and the barriers to citizens is that we can't talk to anybody. I went into the terminal when I saw these birds. I asked for a manager. There's no one to talk to. There's no one that you can reach to do anything about it. So I really welcome a resolution from the community board. I think it needs to go as deep as possible to reach as many of these issues as possible, because there are a lot that people aren't aware of. I don't think people know how many birds are dying, for instance, at the ferry terminal or at the little overpasses that you just see every day but don't pay attention to. So I think that's really important. And I thank you all so much for finally doing this resolution. Michelle and I were late in getting a meeting with you all. We were hoping to set one up, and I'm so glad this has happened and that you're engaging with it. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for bringing it to our attention and giving the statistics that are, as I said, extraordinarily sobering. And we really look forward to following up. So we will do so.
Can we make a suggestion? Because the way that I first heard about this is Wendy, by the way, was the article in the Trib, I think it was. And was it the Trib or the broadsheet? I'm not sure. But if you could also, in addition to our resolution, go back to any press you have and ask for a follow-up story, because I think people are reading about this and it's amazing. So I think we're all fairly horrified to learn the facts. So thank you so much.
Yes, it was indeed the Trib, and we thank Carl for that. Okay, I think we still have just two hands. So I'm going to try it one more time on the committee level. Detta, Al?
Hi, I'm in a very noisy place. So I guess I'll, can you hear me okay, or is there too much background noise?
No, not at all. It's fine. Thank you.
Okay, I guess I was just saying something that was related to earlier when you were talking about having it be dark outside. And I had worked on an outdoor lighting project for a building complex that had some outdoor space. And there were laws that said like the minimum lighting needed for a road, the minimum lighting needed for a path, the minimum lighting needed for a plaza. I think those came from the DOT, but I'm not sure what entity it was that set them. But so I was just wanting to say that because it's like, seems like there's some competing rules out there. That one obviously that's aimed at pedestrian safety, but that one, I'm hearing that you need darkness for the birds. So that's all.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up. I definitely need to look more into the requirements, and we certainly want to make sure that safety is maintained. So using down-shielded lighting in those situations is what we recommend. But that's a really great point in making sure that any legislation we're pushing for is compatible with other legislation and requirements for buildings. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Detta. Gerald Forsberg, I think is our last.
Yeah, thanks, Alice. I'll be very quick here. I simply want to say that I've, in my day job, have been reviewing shop drawings for New York City public schools, in particular windows, and I simply want to share that New York City School Construction Authority has written into their standard specifications bird-friendly glazing, even for renovation projects. So I just want to give a little bit of hope out there. We still need to do more, especially with Manhattan Community Board 1 and the glazing issues we have around here. But I did want to let you know that the schools are sticking to it, so maybe the developers can too, Thank you.
Always welcome to hear a little hopeful thought there. Okay, any closing comments from our presenters? Caitlin, I should say.
I just want to say thank you so much for having me here. Like I said, it's unfortunate that so many birds had to die in one night, but the media attention that has come out of it has really, I think, will save far more birds in the long run. And so I really thank all of you for your attention to this issue. And I'm always happy to work with anyone. So please do reach out to New York City Audubon if you have additional questions. I'm very happy to help. Thanks.
Thanks, Caitlin, for all of this great presentation and for all your great work also on Governor's Island and everywhere else in our community board. And thank you, Michelle and Catherine and Esther. And I know Diana will follow up with you on that. And we will, I think, be taking up this resolution, Diana, correct me if I'm wrong, at the next community board meeting, EPC, Environmental Protection Committee meeting in November. Would that be likely, Diana?
Yeah, and I'll follow up with all the folks that we spoke to tonight. I want to make sure we get all of those statistics, the worst offenders in our district, any specific information, and I'll draft something up for the committee to review and vote on in November. I think there's a lot of interest in being as comprehensive and specific as we can, so I'm happy to work on that with all of you.
Thanks again. I actually, I'm sorry. I just have one other question, not a question, maybe a comment, just to, I assume, Caitlin, that you are working, or I hope you're working with the World Trade Center on the last piece of the puzzle there at 5 World Trade Center in terms of whatever is next down. You know, I took time to read through the environmental impact statement from 2000, I think it was 2007. You know, during that phase when a lot of the buildings were being done, and it was extraordinary how much attention was being promising, you know, very favorable bird results. And it doesn't sound like that was achieved. I'm just curious. I noted something they talked about the peregrine falcons. Are they doing okay down there? That was something that was highlighted. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, there are several nesting peregrines down there. I will say that sometimes when they fledge, they end up in traffic. That's really the issue for the peregrine fledglings. And just a note about 5 World Trade, in our meetings with Silverstein about their current buildings, we brought up 5 World Trade. 5 World Trade will have to adhere to local law 15, and they've already been looking at bird-friendly design guidelines. And so my hope, and it does sound like 5 World Trade will be bird-friendly, which we're very happy about.
Good news. Good to end on a happy note there, Caitlin. Thank you again very much. Thanks all. And I think we will now move on to agenda item 3, 4, and 5, which Diana Sweetie has very kindly taken on as to present. So thanks, Diana, and thanks again, Caitlin.
Sure. Do you want me to take these in any specific order, Alice?
Your call. I see here Uniform Stormwater Rule was the next on the agenda, so that's maybe.
Yeah, it makes sense since it was referenced, right, when we were discussing green streets. And DEP, we heard all about how active they are in the outer boroughs, and that's part of why they are so difficult to get to our Manhattan meetings. We did invite DEP, and I circulated the information that they had sent since they were not going to be able to attend in October. But we are hoping that they'll be able to come in November. I sent them those dates, and specifically on the Unified Stormwater Rule. Let me find it. I have a tab open here. I'd circulated the link in the email that I sent to the committee members on Friday, and I'll put it in the chat again in a moment. It has information on the Unified Stormwater Rule, and I'm not going to go into too much detail, 1, because I'm not an expert, and 2, because we've invited an expert to come and talk about it in November. But for those who are interested in it, there's a presentation that they had given on this and a recording of that presentation. And just I'll read out the brief synopsis that's on the page. The Unified Stormwater Rule will change requirements for how stormwater is managed on new and redeveloped properties in New York City. For information about local law that gives us the authority to develop and implement a unified stormwater rule, go to Intro 1851, which is the actual legislative bill. So I am pasting that in the chat now, and stay tuned for what we hope will be a very exciting and comprehensive presentation in November. And we have lots of other questions for DEP as it relates to their green infrastructure program and lots of other good stuff that they're doing. So we are big fans, and we hope they come in November. And if you have any questions specifically on the Unified Stormwater Rule or anything related to DEP specifically, email me and I'll make sure that they address it as we coordinate for an upcoming presentation.
Thanks, Diana. That's any questions on that one? Or, I mean, I guess we're not going to be able to answer too much, but I think it's just an announcement.
All right, I'll move along, and anybody who has questions, I'll follow up offline. I'll move along to the 5 World Trade Center floodplain notice. And this is something that turned around really quickly in the beginning of, let me see if I could pull it up so you can all see what this thing looks like. There was a very short window for comment on a floodplain notice. One second, let me share my screen here.
Anna's getting that up. I would just want to say on the Unified Stormwater Rule, it's an extraordinary opportunity for the community to realize that this will kind of push developers to really be conscientious in how they will deal with stormwater. And it's kind of an interesting piece of legislation that hopefully will, make a difference. Anyway.
Yeah, thank you. And this is the notice that we had gotten from LMDC on this early floodplain notice related to the 5 World Trade Center development. So this is part of the larger environmental review, and the fact that this proposed development and the general project plan for the development, in that it's changing from office to mixed use, the fact that it's occurring within the 100 and 500 year floodplains triggers this public comment period. All of the information is here. I will circulate it to the committee. This notice came to us at the beginning of October, and the comment period closed today at 5 o'clock. So it was a very quick turnaround, but we did put together this notice here. I think you can see that. It'll be on our site tomorrow, and I can send you a link here. And we captured some general points based on all of our conversations as it relates to South Battery Park City Resiliency, all of the Lower Manhattan Coastal Resiliency projects, noting that the World Trade Center campus had substantial damage during Superstorm Sandy, and that really highlighted the flood risk in that area. And we're paying a lot of attention to what happens, both in terms of flood resiliency and environment and sustainability, as we were just discussing in relation to the World Trade Center complex. So not just in terms of that building, but also in terms of its relationship to the neighborhood, how it's interacting with this other resiliency infrastructure. And we have some specific questions here and requests for more information. Do you want me to read through these, Alice?
Sure.
Okay. So these are things we note. CB1 has critical concerns and questions regarding this proposed mixed-use development within the 100 and 500 year floodplains. 1, in highly dense and flood vulnerable areas like Lower Manhattan, every opportunity should be taken to incorporate stormwater retention strategies. Another thing that was a big topic of discussion tonight, especially considering the large scale of this project. CB1 urges that the proposed development maximize potential opportunities for stormwater retention. 2, CB1 requests assurance that the plans for 5 World Trade Center will be fully consistent with the Mayor's Office of Resiliency's Lower Manhattan Coastal Resiliency Planning. 3, CB1 requests a plan indicating all open green areas on the 5 World Trade Center site, including public ground floor areas, building terraces, and roofs. 4, CB1 requests clarity on how flood risk will be impacted by the South Battery Park City Resiliency and Lower Manhattan Coastal Resiliency projects. Will the completion of these resiliency infrastructure projects eliminate or reduce the flood risk for 5 World Trade Center site? By how much? 5, CB1 requests specific information on how the building will comply with Appendix G of the Building Code for flood resilient construction, such as wet versus dry flood proofing, placement of mechanicals, materials, etc. And 6, CB1 requests information on how flood protection measures at the World Trade Center campus will assist in protecting the specific 5 World Trade Center site, i.e. bollards that also serve as flood protection infrastructure. There are procedural implications for this process. We were very frustrated by the fact that we received this notice at the beginning of October. There was a very short window to comment. The deadline was today before we even had a chance to discuss it in this committee. And the executive committee this month is going to be discussing, and I believe voting on a resolution addressing those procedural and logistical implications. The notice only went out by snail mail. So that equated to a delay, which is a big problem when the comment period is only 2 weeks. So given that, if anybody has specific questions or concerns, the comment period closed, but we have a constant line of contact through the 5 World Trade Center Community Advisory Council and with these parties. So please do feel free to send those to me and I will follow up on them as we continue on.
Great, good review there. Thanks a lot.
And I will move on to my last update, which is quite short, on the 250 Water Street Brownfield Cleanup Program, during which the comment period on the 250 Water Street Brownfield Cleanup Program Remedial Action Work Plan closed on September 30th. That was the comment period that we were strongly advocating along with our elected officials, many groups from the community and individual community stakeholders were advocating for that comment period to be extended until October 15th. It wasn't. We scrambled to put together a comment along with Laura Dodge, who's our independent community monitor and expert consultant on this project. There's an open house on the 250 Water Street Brownfield Cleanup Program tonight, I believe organized by the school community and Children First. And I know that a recording will be available for anybody who's interested in that. And Laura usually attends this meeting to provide updates on the Brownfield Cleanup Program. But given the lull in the program, the comment period just closed. The state agencies are in the process of reviewing all of the comments. Laura was very gracious in attending the open house tonight in lieu of our meeting, but Laura will be attending subsequent meetings when there are more substantial updates. We don't yet have the greatest clarity on timeline as things move forward. There's typically larger gaps of time right when these comment periods close because there's so much interest and so much comment here, but I will also share in the chat our comments and the comments of Laura Dodge, which are very comprehensive on the remedial action work plan. And there are things that we're following up with the state agencies on, like the formulation of a community task force, which is something that's pretty universally called for, so that we have more opportunities and touch point opportunities with the state agencies as we are getting into this remedial action additional investigation, like the remedial design investigation, which was a big topic of discussion as we were going through the remedial action work plan, because further details still need to be worked out on the remedial design investigation, and we are eager to have Laura and the other expert community consultants be able to review that before they move forward on it. And those are all things that we're following up on and making sure that no very invasive work or potentially noxious work takes place, hopefully, ideally during school, or at the very least, not during state testing. So there are things that we're following up on offline, and watch the agendas. This is the committee and this is the opportunity for folks to come and to learn more about this program as we carry on. So more information to come, and I will share that link in the chat right now.
Great.
That's all I got, Alice.
Okay. Well, so we're up to almost just a little bit of conversation about the budget considerations, but I want to highlight two other announcements that are really important. In one case, more than the other. Well, anyway, they're both very important, but this one's really important. Battery Park City Authority provided a presentation for the public scoping meeting for the South Battery Park Resiliency Project, and it was the draft for the environmental impact statement. In other words, what the public wants to see reviewed in the EIS for the South Battery Park Resiliency Project, which is imminent. In others, we're moving forward here. So the comments are due on October 29th. So please review this presentation, which I know Diana has sent around to the committee members, but for the public to be aware that this is on the Battery Park City Authority's excellent website and the CB1 excellent website. So this is available, and you can, scroll through it, listen to it, of course, and, really think about things that may not be there that should be there. And it would be helpful, I'm sure, to the authority to know that, for those of you particularly who are living in Battery Park City Authority. And thanks for those who actually attended the meeting last week. So please be sure to provide the comments. October 29th deadline, okay? Additionally, Nick Spordone, communications guru there at Battery Park City Authority, has told us that on October 28th and November 4th, he's doing, and I love this term, walkshops to show what will be done at the west and north end of the Battery Park City Authority's resilient. So I think he's following up with various emails to be more specific about the timing, but October 28th and November 4th to take a walk through at the west and north end of the Battery Park City Authority's property and to know what they're up to in that area for resiliency. And one more announcement, which is an invitation to participate in a workshop for all people in Community Board 1, organized by the students of Syracuse University's Architecture School on the making of a green district for the west side of Manhattan. So they are looking at the part of the west side that did not get reviewed by the Lower Manhattan Coastal Resiliency Plans, which is to do a plan or consider options, explore ideas for how to make a green district. And they picked the west side of Manhattan, which is kind of exciting, and primarily our community board. So they're really looking for participation of community board members and people that are concerned from the public who know that area, particularly north of Chambers Street. That's October 27th. Next week's between 6 and 8. It's an online meeting. It would be great if you could go and listen and give your thoughts. Great group of students and great professors, really an interesting project. So that's the announcement. So lastly, the fiscal year 2023 budget response. And I guess Diana will put up the
I'll pull up the list. That's another link that I sent to the committee. I hope between last month and this month, people have had a chance to look at it and think about the requests. As I was discussing with Alice earlier today, unfortunately, a lot of these requests are still unfunded and still a ways from being funded, like the resilient, specifically the resiliency stuff. We have DEP requests for the green infrastructure program that maybe we can expand on or add more detail based on tonight's conversation, but I will pull those up. I know Richard sent some specific suggestions, but if folks have suggestions for new items or amendments to the items that we already have, or maybe you notice something that's been fulfilled and we can take it off. We always love it when that happens. It's not often. That would be great. And then the executive committee will be discussing these this month, and then the full board will be voting on them at the end of this month.
Yeah, so whatever, if anything you provide tonight will be what will be discussed at the executive committee, nothing more, nothing less, unless there's a quick addition, but the idea of this is to come in prepared with whatever information we're able to provide tonight. So if anyone has anything, any thoughts, additions, edits, subtractions, I see Wendy Chapman.
Yeah, this is great. And Diana, thanks as always for putting everything together. And I know we're putting the Brooklyn Bridge Park that Rose is interested in parks, but after tonight's meeting, and I of course forgot the name of those giant downspouts, it sounds to me that more and more there's this idea of getting water not going into the sewer systems. And I'm not sure if this is a capital project, but I think it is, to those giant downspouts off of the I would say elevated roadways, because that includes the Brooklyn Bridge, and then of course it includes the FDR. Is that something that we can add in there, some sort of collection of those downspouts? Does that make sense? I mean, to me, that's should be in the bigger project of Rosa's Brooklyn Bridge Park, but that also could be something addressed specifically in the environmental committee.
I like that, Rosa's Park. That's a good one. That'll be your name, Rosa. I think it's a great idea. I think the divide and conquer aspect of trying to put budget items in each of the different departments. So in other words, you've got the Department of Parks, but this would maybe be Department of Environmental Protection. So, it could appear in more than one place. So I advocate for that, but I don't know if anyone objects or has other thoughts. but guess not. Anybody else? Any other thoughts or things people would like to add or edit?
Alice, do you want me to read what Richard had suggested?
Sure. Richard Corman, yep.
He had two suggestions. One, fund an education and support program to assist buildings in the interpretation of their environmental score and the options to reach compliance and better. And two, begin remediation of the CSO system to reduce the overflow into the Hudson. Don't think that's more than 1 or 2 billion. Those are his suggestions. So I'll add those to the list for our committee unless folks have objections.
I've had a hard time going through it, but I assume all the issues that were raised tonight are somewhere buried in this document, in terms of birds, in terms of green infrastructure, specifically Barnett Newman, I know is in there. Now we have Brooklyn Bridge.
There may not be something specifically about birds, and I can note that we should add that because it seems like maybe that's been a blind spot.
I think
so. If it's not accounted for, it should be.
I'm not sure what the ask is here in terms of budget, but
let me make a note of it and I can discuss it with Lucian and try to figure out what agency that would be applicable to.
I think that's a good idea. Anybody else here? Thanks for hanging in. Gerald?
Hey, Alice, I know that I'm not in your committee and I don't mean to, it's late here, but I just want to throw out that previously in one of the other committees, it was brought to our attention that Governor's Island received $150 million from the city after all this rezoning based off of the argument that they were not going to be able to be open year-round and so on. And I just want to say if there's a concern about some funding, I know that we had requested that maybe that 150 million that was allocated to Governor's Island, since they've already received that now, could be put to better use in other community board issues at this point. So do with that what you would like, but there's $150 million out there, it seems, up for grabs.
Well, I'm not sure it's out there. It's been earmarked or whatever to the Governor's Island. I mean, I'm not sure I understand. You're saying to rethink that the way that's being spent. Is that the idea? I'm not sure what your ask is there.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's been earmarked. Again, the argument for the rezoning and for the upzoning was that a large anchor tenant was needed to be able to keep Governor's Island financially feasible. And then suddenly, after the rezoning, the city was able to come up with $150 million. And now we have ferry service going to the island on a regular basis and extended year-round.
Right, right. So, well, I'm not sure what the ask is, but I'm not sure if it's in parks or here. But why don't you specify that a little bit more and maybe bring that up in the executive, because I'm a little lost as to where to exactly put that in. I'm not sure what exactly it is that we're asking for, so I'm going to leave that one open for now. Maybe, you know, just if you can provide maybe a written line about what it is and where it would go. Thanks,
Sure.
Gerald. Anybody else? Okay, I think happily it's 8:29. We can even get out and call it before 8:30. Thanks, everybody. It was a good meeting, a lot of interesting information, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, everybody, for attending.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.
Thanks, Alice. Bye.
Yeah, take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, Diana.
Yeah, I'm going to resend some of the information that oh, everybody's leaving. That came out on the South Battery Park City stuff. So the links translate for the folks that are still on and want to know.